Well, hi everybody. It's meteorologist Joe Chaffee here. It is a Wednesday night, the 23rd of January, 2019, coming up on 5 minutes after 7 o'clock Eastern Time. We've got a lot going on weather-wise, even though it isn't much on the snow side, but there are issues with rain, heavy rain, thunderstorms, and even severe weather, believe it or not. Here we are at the end of January, and we're dealing with springtime issues, unusual but not necessarily unheard of. So just like last night, I'm going to try and focus the first 10 minutes or so on the current weather conditions. So for those of you who are just interested in current weather and maybe going out for the next 3 or 4 days or so, you'll be covered, and then we'll take the second half and the longer part of the live stream will be devoted to the longer range and where we are going with the pattern. So a collective hello to everybody on board tonight. It's always good to see the regulars here and a few new folks as well, which is really nice. So, by the way, we're also going to take a look at the weather in Europe and the weather in Canada. I've got this whole thing kind of formatted out in my head, so hopefully I'll be able to stick to format. So let's begin. We're going to start with the watches and warnings tonight, and there are plenty of them. In the Northeast, we've got some winter weather advisories. Much of that, by the way, is not being driven by snow, but rather by freezing rain and, in some places, sleet, as warmer air is sweeping up the eastern seaboard. It's really incredible when you think about how cold it was here earlier this week. When we had temperatures down below zero in many areas in the Northeast, and even in the southernmost areas and extending further south into the northern mid-Atlantic states, where we saw lows down in the single digits to near 10. And here we are just 48 hours later, and we are dealing with a situation where many areas didn't even have snow at the start, where precip, if it was still cold enough at ground level, was freezing rain. And we're going to see rain all the way up to Caribou, Maine. It's going to wash away a lot of the snow that fell in upstate New York and up through parts of New England. And we're going to see temperatures probably reach into the 60s from parts of, I think it could reach into the 60s, maybe even up into parts of northern New Jersey. It's not impossible. This warm push is pretty solid. The cold front coming eastward is pretty solid as well. But sometimes that's how it happens. When you have extremes, when one extreme pulls out, the bounce from it is often extreme to compensate for it. Flood watches are up. You can see them in the darker greens in a narrow strip, covering western Virginia on through a few counties in northern Maryland. And then it swings across into southeastern Pennsylvania and all of New Jersey. All of New Jersey, southeastern New York, Long Island, and into southern New England. We also have some flood watches up in northern Georgia. We've got various wind advisories and even some high wind warnings that will probably be going up at some point tomorrow. Severe weather going on across the Gulf states today. They're now shifting into the eastern Gulf, into the Florida Panhandle and eastern Alabama, western Georgia. We have some severe thunderstorm warnings. You can see them in the brownish areas off the coast. Severe marine warnings, special marine warnings up for the coastal waters. Various flash flood warnings up as of 7:08 Eastern Time. Always check with your local National Weather Service office for the latest watches and warnings if you're watching this on a replay, along with your latest local radar. Now, on up into the upper Midwest and northern plains, we have a large area that's under a blizzard warning for the eastern parts of both North and South Dakota and western Minnesota. But they're not going to get much snow out of this. They've gotten snow over the last couple of days, and there's plenty of snow on the ground. Here, the issue is wind and visibilities that are going to be under a quarter of a mile. The amount of snow that's being forecasted in most areas is under an inch, and in some cases of new snow, under an inch, and in some cases under a half an inch. It's really about the wind and the restricted visibility. That's what drives a blizzard warning definition. It's not necessary to have heavy snow actually falling. We have some winter weather advisories and various winter storm warnings up for parts of the northern Rockies, extending into parts of northwestern Colorado. And in the bright blue, those are, alerting folks to the potential for an avalanche, believe it or not. So a really relatively busy night with all sorts of weather going on. And we're going to go to the severe weather map at the moment and show you what's happening, because the Storm Prediction Center does have a slight risk, a small area of slight risk of severe weather for the Gulf Coast there into the Florida Panhandle, encased inside a larger area of marginal risk that extends over northern and a good chunk, but not all, of central Florida. And the rain that extends northeastward from there up the west side of the Appalachians into West Virginia and eastern Ohio, now extending its way. I'm sorry, folks. I got a piece of dust in my throat. And it won't get out of the way. Let me just take a swig of water here. And that hopefully should help things out. And some of the precip that's up in the northeast is falling as freezing rain. You'll notice where we have the blizzard warnings up in the Dakotas, we're not seeing very much, if anything at all, going on the radar or in western Minnesota. Again, that's all being driven by the visibility and the strong winds and the blowing snow. You've got a few echoes beginning to show up over in parts of Montana where we have the advisories and the warnings up. So I'm going to load the window. Let me just take this quick opportunity to welcome those of you who are watching from my Google app, my free Google app. I'll put the link up for those of you who don't have it in a little while. Also, big hello to the folks watching from the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut Stormwatch page, from Angry Ben's Angry Weather's Facebook page, and my Facebook page, meteorologist Joe Chaffee. The snowfall prediction here from the Weather Service tonight, again, up through the Dakotas, very little. You do have some heavier snows along the south shores there of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, driven by the wind coming in off of Lake Superior, and also in northwestern parts of Michigan, down southward toward, as you get further south and get toward Gary, Indiana, and Chicago, the amounts do lessen a bit, but we are talking on the order of at least a few inches and maybe some 4 or 5 or 6 inch amounts right along the immediate lakeshore. In the east, let me just roll this back because I have here the total snowfall through Friday. So what you're seeing being forecast, I'm going to try and roll it back. Let's see if it'll load. Okay, so what you're seeing forecast here, I just changed the time frame. I rolled it back to 7 a.m. Thursday morning. So from this lead system, you can see that there's very little here. We're talking in terms of snow, an inch to maybe a couple of 2-inch amounts in parts of Maine. But when we roll through toward the end of the forecast period, you have some clusters here of heavy snow off the lake shores of Lake Ontario around Pulaski and on up north toward Watertown, and also in southwestern New York State, south and west of Buffalo. You're probably going to have some pockets there of up to a foot, and that will be lake effect driven. We've got this weather system going by, and then we also have an Arctic front that we're going to be dealing with. Over the last 72 hours, I'm just going to reduce this. Let's bring it down to, so we can get rid of the snows from the weekend on this. So we're only going to go back 48 hours here on the weather.gov snowfall tool. It's been mostly on the order of a couple of inches in parts of upstate New York and northern Vermont, and some scattered pockets here in Maine. We go back to what has fallen from this new storm in the Great Lakes and in the upper Mississippi Valley. We do have some 8-inch amounts clustered in parts of southeastern Iowa, northwestern Illinois. You've got some 4 and 6-inch amounts there. Chicago got nothing out of this, but just go to the north and west, and you head up till Milwaukee. Milwaukee got 4, a little bit less than what was forecast. And this was from earlier today, so we're probably going to add to these amounts. So let me take that back. It wasn't less than forecast. We just don't have all the final numbers yet. And further north, of course, here's the reason why you're getting all this blowing snow, because in the last 48 hours, we've seen some 8-inch plus snowfalls in eastern North Dakota, northwestern half of Minnesota, with lesser amounts as you go south. But, you know, you put in there a stiff wind and you've got a problem. And the snows also were fairly substantial up the Rockies and on up into the Pacific Northwest, and even going back across Utah and in through Nevada. Here's the latest surface map. As you look in the east, you've got this snaking warm front that is pushing up. The warm front is actually kind of pivoting up from the southeast, the way it's been analyzed. If you look at the temperature profile across the Carolinas and into southern Virginia, you've got temperatures there in the mid and upper 60s with dew points in the low 60s. So the warm tropical air has really advanced pretty quickly northward along coastal areas, but it hasn't quite made it up through western Virginia, western North Carolina, where we've got temperatures there still kind of stuck in the 40s. Jump to the other side of the mountains and you're in the 50s ahead of the cold front. So you get these sort of weird profiles that develop. I mean, they look weird, but they actually aren't that uncommon in situations like this. And of course, the actual low center now in Lake Huron with the trailing cold front. Storm track basically going up to the west of the Appalachians and up into the Great Lakes. So that just floods the east with warm air. You've got southwest isobars going all the way up to Maine. Right now, temperatures in Maine are in the at least at 4 o'clock, we're in the teens and low 20s. So the warmest air hasn't quite got there yet, but the freezing line has already pushed its way through Massachusetts and up to just north of I-90 in New York State. So the job is being done here by the warm advection that is occurring up the East Coast. And then on the other side, you've got some colder air behind this, but there's an Arctic boundary that is pushing into the Dakotas. That really marks the bitter cold air, relatively speaking, that is up in Canada, in west central Canada, with this 1036 high, with temperatures below zero this afternoon. That high is what is going to be coming down. And when that front clears the East Coast, by the way, we're going to see these temperatures drop in stair-step fashion. You'll get a big drop into Friday, and then you'll get another drop into Saturday. The Arctic boundary will kind of separate that as it moves through on Friday, during later Friday. The first front comes through Thursday tomorrow. The second front will come through later on Friday. Kind of a busy radar tonight, especially back through the Appalachians. And then if you look to the south here, you can see this snaking line of thunderstorms, some stronger than others, but parts of this line look pretty healthy, moving across east central Alabama, and also looks like some cells there in northwest Georgia, and they also extend down into the Florida Panhandle and out into the Gulf of Mexico. Further north, you have mostly rain. Looks like the Great Lakes snows have pretty much finished are done. And then you've got the precip that's moving ahead up through Pennsylvania and through upstate New York. I said from the storm from the weekend, when precip starts in New Hampshire and Vermont and in Maine, before it starts in Connecticut, New Jersey, Long Island, and southeastern Pennsylvania, it's a rain situation, okay, and not a snow situation. Or if it were cold enough for snow at the start, it would be snow changing to rain. So let's run through the NAM model here. You'll see that sharp trailing, that cold front is going to be moving on through. The rains will be moving in probably for the morning commute in the eastern Pennsylvania to southern New England zone. And then you're going to get this one solid shot of heavy rain as this wave goes by. And I want to just get a close-up view here because the pressure gradient as the wave goes by, if you look at the isobars there, they're pretty tight. And as the front approaches and the low goes to the northeast, the winds are likely to get fairly strong. Now, sometimes what happens in situations like this, in the winter and in the spring, is that the winds don't always mix down to the very bottom of the atmosphere, especially if there's some kind of an inversion. In other words, if temperatures are rising with height rather than falling. So, I've seen it happen where you think you're going to get the big wind, and certainly everything would suggest that you do, and then it just doesn't mix down in the bottom 1,000 feet of the atmosphere. I tend to think this time around that we should get at least some gusty winds during Thursday as that front nears, and there will, I think, also be the potential for some thunderstorms. Now, the question is whether there would be a changeover to snow on the backside, which the dam indicates happens in upstate New York and northeastern PA. 9 times out of 10, the precip just shuts off. The GFS wants, and the parallel GFS try to change it back. I'm a little skeptical of it. I think even if it doesn't really amount to anything other than maybe a few flurries at the back end. If there's going to be an issue with accumulation, then you'd really have to look further north, up in upstate New York, maybe up along and north and northeast of I-90, where you have a little bit more time and perhaps a bit more in the way of intensity to work with. But that should be about it. And then here comes the Arctic front that's going to come through for Friday night into Saturday. The overall scheme of things here, when we head into the weekend, you'll notice that much of the country is dry. We are gradually transitioning over into a very, very broad cold pattern in the atmosphere. So it's probably going to minimize weather events going forward. And at least the way it looks, we won't see anything too strong. You see some areas of snow here on Sunday. Then we'll bring in an even colder air mass as we move into the middle part of next week. So I'm going to now switch over to the long range, and we're going to talk about that. I want to start here at this map for Monday, where we have a low that is forming in the Gulf of Mexico. You've got a low that is dropping down from Canada into the Dakotas, a cold high north of Lake Superior. The air in the east is cold, but it's modifying from its low point, which will be on Saturday, and the low is dropping southeastward. Now, we've been talking about the fact that there's a lot of pieces here at work in the atmosphere. The low to the north, and you've got this low that's crossing Florida. We had model runs a few days ago, and various models bringing a storm up the East Coast, an intensifying storm up the East Coast. It's there on one run, it's gone on the next. One model has it one run, the next, and it's gone. And then another other model who didn't have it on its prior run, then it pops up again. These two pieces are forecast to stay separate, mainly because that southern feature you see there, the one that's going over Florida, is kind of in its own flow as it goes out into the Atlantic. So if that's the case, then they're going to wind up just going their merry way. That one's going to go its merry way, and then the one from the north is going to drop in. Sometimes, if the with this system that's dropping down into the upper Midwest, a short wave that's dropping down into that position, if this system over Florida didn't have an alleyway to move out to the northeast, then it would probably turn and start moving up the East Coast. The models are insisting that that alleyway is going to remain open for that southern low to move out to the northeast. And you see that it does on this particular run. And on the last several runs of the GFS, that has been the case. I think that that's probably the most likely scenario. However, I would still leave the door slightly open a crack, okay? If that alleyway in the Atlantic, for some reason, it were to close off, which is always possible. That part of the flow is kind of weak, so it wouldn't take much for that to happen. Then you might wind up going back to some of those solutions that would turn this coastal low up the eastern seaboard for Tuesday into Wednesday. I just want to, like I said, I'm just going to leave the door open a crack for another day or so, just to completely rule it out. We've gone on this model from it being way out and almost off the picture where you couldn't see it. Now it's kind of come back a little bit, but it has to come back a long way. So the model is certainly suggesting that that part of the jet stream is going to remain open for it to stay offshore. And then you wind up with the low that drops down into northern Illinois, kind of crossing over the Great Lakes, and that brings an Arctic front through the east. This late afternoon run hints at maybe a little bit of a weak wave that develops after the front goes by, and that's why it has this area of snow that it's showing. I wouldn't put a whole lot of faith in that at this point. It's 6.5 days out in the long range. But what really stands out here is if you look up toward the Great Lakes, this is really brutally cold air. The thickness values here are about as low as you ever see them when they come into the United States. When you get cold air from Canada dropping, from the Arctic dropping down, you don't see numbers that low that often. So this is a brutal cold air mass. We're talking lows that are probably going to be in the neighborhood of 30 below or even lower across parts of the Dakotas and Minnesota and even into Wisconsin if this verifies for the middle part of next week. If this does verify, that cold air, that bitter cold air, will eventually get into the east late next week. However, it will be modified. The coldest of that cold air is going to wind up going north of the Great Lakes and into southeastern Canada. But certainly that cold air will penetrate and actually get pretty far south because the rain-snow line, which is the last dashed blue line that you see here, is running down through southern Georgia and across northern Louisiana. So it does get pretty far to the south. That push also brings that cold air down into Texas as well. So it pushes down through the plains. So you get one of those blue northers in Texas later Monday night, later Monday into Monday night as that front just kind of goes whipping by. And the most of the cold air is going east of the Rockies here. But this is a really impressive system. So let's go to the upper air and let me show you what's happening. I'm going to use one of the maps where the blue color is a little less dark, so because it's so dark on the other maps you can't really see what's happening. Let me just at this point bring up something. I wrote a post today about the upcoming pattern for next week. Somehow, but I'm just astounded. Actually, I'm not surprised. I write a post about next week and only next week, and it appears someone just completely misinterpreted the appearance of the article and the title and assumed that I was talking about the entire winter. I was not. I'm not that good, okay? I am not that good to be able to tell you I'm not even that good to tell you for sure what's going to be going on next week. And some will accuse me of being not good enough to tell you what's going to happen 10 minutes ago. But be that as it may, it was all about next week, not about the rest of the winter. I just got a kick out of how it was easily misinterpreted. But what is happening as we head through this week? Of course, you see this trough that is setting up in the eastern half of the U.S. Now, the folks in my neck of the woods, the snow weenies that live in the coastal areas from Boston on south, are wondering why is, what is going on? Why is it not that we're not getting any snow with all of this? And yet, and they point to the fact that, we had this, all the stuff about the split in the polar vortex in the stratosphere and how it was going to play out in the bottom of the atmosphere, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and that it was all nonsense, and so on. No, it wasn't nonsense. All those things came to be. The outcomes now from that split and everything else are happening as well. The problem is that the notion that you could have this one event basically guarantee snow for a specific area is nonsense, okay? And when I say that, I mean from the standpoint of you can make a general statement and say that it will impact a large area, and that's fine. But to specifically point out that it's going to impact an area that runs along an interstate is, that's a bit much. The problem is that while these big scale events happen, and you can speak up to them in general terms, at the end of the day, where is the trough? Where is the ridge? Where is the jet stream? How is the flow setting up? If you look on this map, you can see that if we draw a line to try to make where the axis of the trough is. In other words, where do the winds bottom out, where they go from northwest to west to southwest? At the point where they make that bottom, we'll call that the axis. That's going to be where the axis is. It runs pretty much north-south through Lake Superior, through Chicago, down to New Orleans. Okay? The trough is at 90 west. It's too far west for East Coast cities, the coastal cities in particular, to get snow for the most part. There are ways to do it, but in general, the trough is too far west. This is a great trough for Chicago, for Milwaukee, for Detroit and Cleveland to a certain extent. Under certain circumstances, maybe Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, Indianapolis, St. Louis, depending on the situation. But it's not good for Washington, D.C., for Boston, for Philadelphia, for Hartford, for New York City. It's just not, because this is, with the trough axis that far west, storms are going to want to go either up the west side of the Appalachians or even further west than that, or into the Great Lakes. And when that happens, you get mostly rain. Now, with a trough like this, you're going to participate in the cold air, albeit you'll probably get modified versions of these air masses, but still they'll be plenty cold. But the end result may very well be that you'll get shots of cold air that'll be around for a couple of days, and then there's no way to keep them in there, so they move out, and the next system approaches with the next bitter cold air mass behind it, and in between, you warm up and rain. That's just, it's a function of where the trough is. It's set up too far west for the East Coast cities, at least the way it is. This is what the way the models are indicating. And there's one other big problem, and I'll get to that in a second. So the upper trough is going to swing up and around. If you look on Saturday, there's actually a weak shortwave that is running from Kentucky southeastward, and that lifts up, but it really doesn't have very much to work on. We're getting now into Saturday night and Sunday. The southern shortwave is in West Texas, back down into Mexico at the bottom of the trough. That moves into the Gulf of Mexico. The north is doing its thing, swinging short waves around, so you get this reinforcing surge of cold air that comes in for Saturday, and then that starts to lift out. So now, when we're at Monday, you've got three pieces here that are evident. Piece number one is the first upper low that's pulling out in eastern Canada, so that's allowing the jet to relax a little bit. Then you've got this southern stream shortwave in the central Gulf of Mexico, and then you've got this other shortwave that's dropping down into the northern plains. The key to having a storm along the East Coast is to get those two shortwaves, the one in the Gulf and the one that's up in the plains, to at least get close enough where it looks like they might be phasing together. Or if they're not phasing, at least close enough that they'll take that southern system and start to lift it up the East Coast. Now, today's run comes a little bit closer, but it's still a miss. The southern shortwave gets kicked out. And then look at what's coming down from Canada here, down toward Lake Winnipeg. The vortex itself seems to be dropping down into northern Minnesota and up into the upper peninsula of Michigan, or perhaps it might even be further south than that, into Wisconsin. We're looking at really the body of the core of the Arctic air coming down in one big shot into the plains and into the Great Lakes. That's where the coldest air would be. In the process of getting there, because that southern stream misses, the northern feature, the northern shortwave, pretty much will take a low up toward the Great Lakes, the eastern Great Lakes, or maybe you could wind up taking a low into northeastern Ohio or up or into western New York. So any precipitation that comes out of this in the east would be, at best, maybe snow at the start that changes to rain, or it may just be plain rain before the bitter, bitter cold air sweeps in for the second half of next week. And we will see some of that bitter cold air, but the core is going to be up where the upper low is. That is really impressive to see that upper low drop down the way it's being modeled. The European also, and by the way, the ensemble members of these models actually are even more dynamic than the operational, if you want to believe it. But the European, again, 3 pieces. You've got the low in eastern Canada pulling out, the southern stream shortwave in the central Gulf, the northern stream system coming in, and now suddenly that vortex starts to drop down. And on the European, it actually drops down further south into Wisconsin. You don't see this happen too often. We had the long-range models show this last week on a couple of runs, and they sort of backed off and had it disappear entirely. Now they have it coming down again. Let me just say that this is not a good setup for snow either. This, to me, and this is the crux of the piece that I wrote about on my website, meteorologistjoechaffee.com, is that this is this is where snow lovers are going to really feel like they're cursed, because we're going to be in a situation where we're literally going to be so deep into the cold air. If you notice the broadness of this jet stream, how it sweeps down the Rockies, across the Gulf states, and then out over the Atlantic. It's a giant bowling ball that or salad bowl, or however you want to describe it, that just drops in there. There's no room here. Whatever shortwaves are running around in all of this are pretty weak. You don't see there's no indentation in those height lines. You don't see anything that looks remotely like a V that is swinging down and around. And as a result, you're going to wind up just being very cold and very dry, with, other than whatever happens Tuesday, that's it. And then that vortex starts to lift out, and beyond that, as we go into the long range, beyond 240, there's some debate here on how that's going to play out. The split flow that we've had on and off through this winter so far might come back. There's some signs that may be the case. The Pacific may wind up becoming a problem again down the road. Hard to say. At least that's from the snapshot that the models have given us today. I'm going to switch back to the GFS again and take you on the surface and show you. And we're going to look at some of these temperatures because they are really ridiculous. But let's back off here. And at least from the standpoint of the surface, there's your low that goes out east of Florida. Two streams stay separate. The other low moves across the southern part of the Great Lakes, heads into southeastern Canada. You have an Arctic boundary that moves through on Wednesday. I wouldn't put faith in what the model is showing there with that snow there on the backside, at least not 6.5 days out. But the big highs coming down here, the way it's being depicted, that cold air really gets in here. And you'll notice as we go through Thursday and through Friday, a little warm advection snow back through the Great Lakes on Saturday. And there's another cold front that pushes into the east as we move into Sunday and Monday. Now we're at day 11 and 12. At that point, I honestly have no idea how that's going to look. But to take a look at some of these temperatures that we're going to see, I'm going to jump up to the north central U.S. and we'll put the shaded contours. Okay, this is actually Friday morning, so let's back up. So starting from tonight, okay, here's the shot that is going to be working its way into the east for Friday and the weekend. Notice by Friday morning, you've got minus 20, minus 25 degree temperatures across Minnesota, minus 9 at Chicago, a double digit below zero in northern Illinois through much of eastern Iowa, all of Wisconsin. I mean, just really, brutal air. Saturday, it just going into Saturday morning, it moderates somewhat. Now we go to Sunday, and you're seeing, look at where the 32-degree line is, and look at where the single-digit line is. So we're starting to see that next weather system that's probably getting ready to drop southeastward to set up for early next week. And now here comes that really cold air. Watch the temperatures up in the Dakotas, where it warms up into the mid-30s and 40s. Suddenly you're below zero. Now you're 10 below zero. Now you're 20 below zero. We're at Tuesday morning here, and now we're at Wednesday morning, which would probably be the coldest. So we've got minus 11 in Chicago. Looks like a minus 33 or 34 in Minneapolis. I'm trying to see if there's any. There's no minus 40s in there. I see a minus 39. This is at 1 o'clock in the morning. Now we see the minus 40s. So if this verifies, we're looking at 22 degrees below zero in Chicago, 30 degrees or more below temperature-wise, 30 below zero or colder in Wisconsin, Minnesota, and on up through the Dakotas. That is if that vortex drops down as modeled, you are going to see these extreme temperatures. We still are about 6 days away from this, 7 days away from this, really. So there's still room for models to maneuver about whether that vortex is actually going to drop that far south. The way that you would have maybe a chance for something to happen in the east is if perhaps the vortex doesn't drop as far south, or the flow is at least the flow would not be as broad. That bowling ball look that we saw would be less so. That might allow for a disturbance to move along on it. But it's hard to argue when you got the models and the ensembles kind of both on the same page with this. So it does look like, at the very least, it's going to get brutally cold there for at least a few days until we start to see moderation finally by Friday at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, 12 noon, it's at 6 above in Chicago. Just want to see how many hours. So basically from 8 p.m. Tuesday of next week to maybe noon on Friday, it's going to be below zero, and in Chicago, and much of that time double-digit below zero, if these models do verify, if the idea of that vortex is correct. Just want to give a look, though. We'll give the whole profile to temperatures here. And again, the astounding thing is the fact that, at least for those that live in my neck of the woods, all this cold air coming down, and you can't get a flake or an ice pellet out of it. Tell me that is not frustrating to snow lovers. It has to be. It has to rip your heart out if that's the case. So here's the maps for going into the weekend in the east. Again, the core of this first shot of cold air, most of it goes west and north, but we do get, it does bleed down. You've got temperatures down to freezing into South Georgia and into South Alabama, 40s going all the way down almost into southern Florida. And then we go to Sunday and Monday, so the south kind of moderates a bit. But as far as the extent of the cold getting down into Texas, for example, looks like the freezing line kind of comes to a stop there in northern Texas. It does get down into the low 40s, though, along the Texas coast, which is pretty cold. And then you've got Wednesday morning. That looks like the coldest morning, where you've got the freezing line going almost down to Houston, right to about New Orleans, and then across into the Florida Panhandle. The broadness of this trough, by the way, there's a bottom to where the coldest air gets. So that freezing line really doesn't penetrate down into, say, Central or South Florida, although it will get into North Florida, and it might get further south than what's being modeled here. But that's just incredible when you look at the extent of that cold air. Let's switch off and go to southeastern Canada now and take a look at what the weather's going to be like in Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, and through New Brunswick. And of course, with the east having to deal with these snow to rain cases, same holds true for New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and Newfoundland. And in fact, you'll notice, whenever you get a situation like this, where you've got this southwest flow, and the broadness and the long wavelength of the trough, you're going to draw that warm air pretty far north, almost into Labrador, with a low tracking up the mouth of the St. Lawrence River and then moving northeastward. So even the folks in southeastern Canada are dealing with snow to rain situations out of this. Cold and dry to follow. Looks like a weather system approaching on Sunday, kind of weak. There's a coastal low that's part of that ocean system, or at least there's a lead low that runs out, and that looks like it might clip Nova Scotia and Newfoundland with some snow. And there's that second low, okay? You should be able to see it on the screen now that comes into the picture and how far out it is. It's at 41 and 60. I mean, so it's pretty... It's going to have to come in 600 miles to have any impact. So you're asking a lot here. And that lifts up and out. You've got the weather front with the Arctic boundary pushing into Nova Scotia and Newfoundland, and then lifting up to the northeast. That bitter cold air is going to move into southeastern Canada, by the way, through all of this. We can look at their temperatures. And by the way, I pulled up the anomalies. So for the coast, it's not that far below normal, but you can see where the much below normal temperatures are. This is for by next Friday. So it actually goes above normal there for Tuesday and Wednesday ahead of the Arctic boundary, and then it turns cold to very cold. Although, again, the coldest air is going to be back over in Quebec and not so much in New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and Newfoundland, although it will be colder than average. The total snowfall in this stretch is going to be significant, but not for the coastal areas, more for inland areas, north and west, interior New Brunswick on up into Quebec, and of course heading up more so into Labrador. I only have like 8 days here, but we'll just add out a few. Doesn't add any additional snow, but just to make sure that we got the whole 10-day period. So over to Europe. As we were looking yesterday, we noticed that there were a lot of east winds. We'll start with their snow map, and it looks like a pretty vibrant period for snow in England and Scotland. Heavier amounts as you go north and on the west shores of England and Scotland. And also it looks like there's some heavier snows up in Northern Ireland, less so in the south. A lot of snow as you get down into most of France, northern parts of Spain, and even extending further south. You're getting snow that's going to occur up in the areas in North Africa, in the mountains. And also when we look at Italy, very, very busy. You've got snow up and down. There was one of these runs a couple of runs ago that had snow pretty much covering all of Italy. But given the pattern overall of what's happening in Europe, I would not be surprised to hear about snow in Rome, snow in Naples again, snow in Sicily, snow on the beaches, etc., etc. And a fair amount of snow as you go up through France and Germany, and then it kind of lightens up a little bit going east of there before it picks up again when you get into Siberia. So it looks like a pretty active snow period across Europe. So why don't we take a look at what's happening on a daily basis very fast? Because part of this whole polar vortex split, of course, having impact on both sides. And we do have a system coming in over the weekend, bringing some snow for the east shores of England and a little bit on the west shore. But it's, I think it's for Tuesday into Wednesday where it becomes a bit more impressive with that flow coming down from Greenland. And yesterday, models were actually showing these easterly isobars kind of building back westward toward England and Ireland. They've kind of backed off from that as far as getting the flow from Siberia coming back all the way to the west, but there seems to be ample cold air from Greenland to sweep chances for snow here as we get into the first days of February. At least that was the story on this model run. But I want to go back to hold the idea that you still might wind up getting the cold burst from the east building back westward, like what happened last year. I don't know if it'll happen at the same magnitude, but we did have at least one model run that indicated that was a possibility as we head into the very last days of January and into the first days of February. So that I think kind of says it all as far as what's going on tonight. As always with weather, there's never any guarantee. Joe and Joe, my colleague Joe Ray and I on the Joe and Joe show last night, we pulled up a bunch of New York City snow statistics, and you can watch that video, by the way, because I did put it on the video library earlier today, so you might want to give it a look. But we talked about the fact of the unusual nature for New York City, which has had depending on how you look at the numbers, 6 above normal snow winters in a row, which has never happened. And when you go through all the data going back to 1869, there are far more years where you have sub-average snowfall than you do above-average snowfall. The average snowfall in New York City, the 30-year average right now is 25, up from the prior 30-year average, which was 20, up from the prior 30-year average, which was 30. So you've got that. The long-term average is just under 30. It's about 28.8, 28.9, something like that. So we've had 5 years, and not just New York City, but areas very close to New York City, particularly to the east, have had a number of those winters where the snowfall was actually double what the city got. I had 75 inches for my seasonal snowfall last year, which I'm only 47 miles east of Midtown Manhattan, out on Long Island. And Long Island in the last 20, I've said it, we've talked about this before, Long Island in the last 18 or so years has really basically become the new Buffalo, because it seems to always find a way to snow big out there. At least that's been the case in recent years. So this year, we had our snow in November. New York City has not had an event with a 1-inch snowfall since November 15th, okay? So we are going on 15, 46, 69 days since the last time we had an inch of snow fall. The snow since, in the month of January, we had one day, it was last Thursday, we had 0.2 of an inch, and then we had, I'm sorry, let me flip that. We had 0.5 an inch. And then from Saturday's system, New York City had 0.2 of an inch of snow. So 0.7 for the month of January. Still haven't had a system to produce a 1-inch snowfall as of yet. Okay, it happens. And when you have the trough and the ridge, the troughs and ridges are in the wrong spot. If the Pacific Jet is not behaving in a let's call it, doesn't even have to necessarily behave in a specific way, but let's just say it behaves in a reasonable way and not in some disorganized mess like it is now, or in one of those situations where you have this sort of screaming jet in the Pacific flooding the U.S. with warm air. You've got a lot of other things that are just not lining up correctly. To put a finger on a single thing is not really the right approach. Some people, I've seen some people mention the NAO. The NAO, as I've said many times, is vastly overstated, vastly overrated, and it's not necessary to have a negative NAO in order to get snow in the east coast of the United States. We had there've been all too many numerous snowfalls with a positive NAO. Okay, they may not lead to huge, big, humongous storms, but you can produce substantial snowfalls without it. It just doesn't necessarily extend much further south, down to Baltimore, Washington, for example, but it does have impact as you head up from New Jersey north and east into southern New England. So it's not any one thing, it's a whole bunch of things, and it's hard to imagine that we're going to go the rest of the winter with nothing. You would think that something would happen. You could make a case, I think, that if this vortex drops down, when it pulls out, perhaps in the process of pulling out, sometimes you can get storms to occur. So I would maybe start thinking about looking at that time frame in early February. If that vortex does wind up pulling out as modeled, that perhaps something could evolve out of that scenario. But right now there's no real indication that that is going to indeed be the case. Izzy D, I don't know. I really didn't look too close about the Middle East. Was kind of on the edge of the map, and I sort of went through that pretty quickly. So I would have to give it further analysis. Brandon Doherty, don't you think we are just in for a winter with cold and little snow? Yeah, of course. A subpar winter for this area is certainly not only is it unusual, it happens more often than the winters where you get a lot of snow. Yeah, absolutely. If we wind up with very little snow from here going forward, that wouldn't shock me. It's got to happen eventually. You can't have every year with snowfalls running 50% or more above average. It's just that's not something that you can sustain over the long term. When you look at the stats and you look at where the averages are, how many standard deviations are we from the mean with regards to snow versus normal. If you run the stats a certain way, I'm sure you'll probably come up with something that suggests that we are due for a winter where you're not going to wind up with a whole lot of snow in the East. Now let's be careful here because the East is a big place. It has the winter. If you go count through everything that happened through November for upstate New York, for central and northern New England, it's pretty much on course. There's a snow hole that runs from Boston to Philadelphia, encompassing everybody in between, and extends west, covering maybe a good chunk of the state of Pennsylvania. The areas to the south, Washington D.C. had a 1-foot snowfall this winter, and parts of Virginia they've had 2 major snowfalls this winter. So there's no. You've got heavier snows that have occurred to the south, heavier snows that have occurred to the north, heavier snows that have occurred to the northwest, and there's this hole right sitting where a lot of us are. That's just how it works sometimes. There were a lot of winters in the 70s that were like this. A whole lot of winter. Actually, in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, there were a whole lot of winters that were like this, including 4 in a row that were just miserable for snow lovers. 1996, 97 through 1999, 2000. 4 straight winters with, really super subpar snowfalls. And yet, at the same time, if the circumstance presents itself, all it will take is one solid snowstorm to bring those seasonal numbers, even in the snow hole areas, not that far from average. Okay, so snow statistics are very deceptive because they don't. When you look at the raw number, you don't know how it was produced. Was it produced by, if you've got a 30-inch, let's just for round numbers, 30-inch snowfall for the season, was that produced by 10 3-inch snowstorms? Was it produced by a couple of 6-inch snowstorms, maybe a 10-inch snowstorm, and then peppering with a few smaller ones? Or was it really like a 20-inch snowstorm and then a couple of other small ones, and that was about it? So, it doesn't imply that it could be snowing from the end of November to the middle of March. It's the raw number. Then you got to look deeper and see, well, how did we get to that? How did we get there? Did it come all at once? Was it in the first half? Was it more in the second half? Was it evenly distributed all the way through? Very, 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 very interesting. How the numbers, you can look at them and come up with, you look at them, straight up and come up with your opinions on them, and then you look deeper and you realize that, well, it's the numbers don't necessarily reflect what the actual reality was. That it could have all come in a 4-week time frame, and the rest of the time, you got next to nothing. So I'm just running really quick through the chat. Chad Crawford, I see you're having your weather dreams again. Will they come to fruition? I don't know. There should be decent lake effect this weekend in upstate New York with the Arctic fronts going by and the the wind coming in off the lakes, I would not be at all surprised. And I'm just running through the last of your chat here, and see if there's any questions that I can take. Johnny Quest, 100 inches of rain again this year. All I can say is eventually that pattern will shut off. And by the way, one stat that was really important, and Joe Rayo brought this up last night, in New York City anyway, all the years that we've had over 60 inches of rain for the year have occurred since 1970. None before 1970. So I think there have been 8 or 9 of those years since 1970. Every single one of those years, every single one of the winters that followed the year that we had the 60-inch or more rainfall, all those winters had below average snowfall. Now, it could be a string of perfect coincidences, or it could be saying, well, listen, you got all that rain because, well, you had a pattern that was probably warmer than it normally was, and as a result, you had an atmosphere that held more moisture. I'm giving a very simplistic explanation here. The atmosphere held more moisture, and therefore you wind up with far more rain, and then that overall warmth carried itself over in the wintertime and was able to kind of compensate for any kind of cold air masses that tried to make that rain more snow than anything else. That's a kind of an easy way to look at it, and certainly something that I think has some sense to it. I think you'd have to dig deeper into the numbers and take a look at really what's going on. Or it may just be, hey, it's most of the winters in this area are below average, so it could match up that you've gotten 8 in a row would not be something that would be totally unusual. All right, going to end it here at this point. Thanks very much for being here, folks. Of course, I continue to have exclusive and weather coverage almost all of the time, but not quite all of the time, because after all, I do have to sleep. But if weather is your thing, you might want to consider joining my Patreon platform. I'm putting the link on the chat right now. There's also a link on the descriptor to this live stream, or if you're watching it on the replay, descriptor of the video. It's just $2 a month, and you get private live streams just for Patreon members. You can message me anytime, posts that are directed just for you, and more. And we do even more model stuff as well. Thanks, Brandon. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for hitting Super Chat. You're a Patreon member. You don't have to hit the Super Chat, but I really appreciate that you do. Thank you. Again, it's just $2 a month to sign up to the Patreon platform, and it's a great way to support what I'm doing here on YouTube and all the other stuff that I'm doing. Okay, Google app, my app on Google Play, it is in the process of being updated. So that is a good thing. And there'll be some new additions to the app. Hopefully they'll approve it any day now. We just submitted it today, by the way, in terms of the update. So here is the link to Google Play. You can download my free weather app to Android, where you also can watch these live streams. Let me get this off here. Sorry. You can watch these live streams right from the app itself. So you've got that is a freebie. The iPhone version, I almost am afraid to say it, but maybe any day now. Okay, I got a kind of a hint today that it was really close. So keep your fingers crossed. But Apple's kind of finicky. I'm almost afraid to talk about it, but we're really, really close. So as soon as that it goes on the App Store on Apple, I'll have that iPhone that app link for you, so you can go and download it for your iPhone. Tonight at 9:25, the Joe and Joe Show on Facebook, so be sure to tune in for that. It's on my Facebook page, Meteorologist Joe Chaffee, and if you miss it, it'll be uploaded to YouTube. I'll have it up there tomorrow morning, and also it will be on the weather app. And that really kind of pretty much wraps it up for tonight. So Tropical Tidbits there were issues today with the NOAA ingesting its data and disseminating it out. So we didn't get the GFS maps till late, but I last looked. The maps on Tropical Tidbits have updated, so you can head over there and take a look at the 12Z and the 18Z GFS. Both the operational and the parallel are now in. So give it a look, and in the meantime, have a great evening. Be careful tomorrow with the weather running around up and down the East Coast, and of course you folks down in the Gulf Coast dealing with severe weather tonight. Again, be sure to check your local National Weather Service office by going to weather.gov for the latest weather information regarding severe weather. Have a good evening, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow.